A few depart in silence. Some people linger too long and neglect to knock. I waited to be invited at the entrance all the time. Ultimately, I constructed a new home. I placed it between the pages of a book he never completed reading, in the drawer next to the bed. I let the breeze through by opening all the windows that evening. Like breath, the drapes rose slowly. After pouring myself a glass of wine, I saw the sky turn from blue to charcoal while standing at the back door. And as the mansion calmed down, its ancient bones groaning softly, I understood. Those who had rewritten me didn't need to remember me. I had recalled who I was. Not with a vengeance, with a choice. Not with sound. In silence. Additionally, I didn't leave the porch light on for anyone when I turned it off for the evening. I had forgotten how thick the paper was, perhaps because I was approaching it in a different way this time, as a declaration rather than as a formality or a just in case. Keep quiet. Final. Mine. Beside my reading glasses and a solitary pencil, I sat at the dining table with the will laid open in front of me. No pen. Not quite yet. This was no time to sign anything. Stillness before ink was necessary for this type of counting. Except for the mantel clock's ticking, the room around me was quiet. The same one that used to chime every hour when my son was a child, waking him up from homework naps and the quiet of adolescence. It was like living inside a church bell, he used to complain. Noise that wasn't his own bothered him. I glanced down at the paper once more. Despite the dryness of the legalese, the pauses were significant. I'm leaving for my son. The sentence remained incomplete. Intentionally. After our most recent meeting, my lawyer had left it that way. She said, "When you're ready." Not earlier. I had lost my anger. Plans, however, are merely promises if both parties follow through on them. The purse was in my palm. I couldn't explain why it was warm. From memory, perhaps. Perhaps from the stress of waiting too long. I refrained from crying. I didn't sigh at all. I just went to the filing cabinet, pulled out the lowest drawer, the one that was locked, and put it in. I had started drafting the scholarship paperwork in between the insurance forms, not concealed, simply rerouted. I shut the drawer. The key was turned. After that, the home was quieter. Not in the way of loneliness. In the way a room feels after everyone has left and you sit down to breathe and realize how long you've been entertaining people who have never expressed gratitude. The assistant to my lawyer called me that night. Just a standard check-in. The updated paperwork was prepared, revised, carried out. If you would like to send copies to any of the parties involved, please let us know, she stated. No, I replied. I enjoyed the aroma of the roasted vegetables, but I didn't eat them for anyone. I put the rest of the papers in the safe, examined the lock. Then I went to the linen closet, almost instinctively. The old baby blanket that had been wrapped around him on the day we brought him home was pulled down, gentle, worn out. The edges are yellowed. After holding it for a while, I carefully folded it and put it in the charity bag beside the door. Certain memories are from the past. It is not necessary to preserve certain symbols in order to honor them. I wrote a final note later that afternoon, not for the lawyer or the will, and I lighted a candle. Only for me, however, with a stamp, a signature, and the unobtrusive shuffle of papers travelling the world. I used to buy birthday cakes for him from the bakery, which I passed on my way home. The new sign on the exhibit said, "Pre-order now for Mother's Day." I hesitated. Just a second. Last year he hadn't called. Or the previous year. Not since the transition, as he referred to it. The methodical, slow process by which he had eliminated me from vacations and pictures, as though my existence had to be subtly eliminated to create space for something more refined. I wasn't resentful, though, no more. Being the empty chair had become second nature to me. I had just decided to quit preparing the table now. The scent of rosemary filled the air when I arrived home. I wasn't unsure, though. All I wanted to do was be intentional. That was the distinction between resolution and grief. I recalled a moment that had been etched in my mind like a splinter. It was neither spectacular nor dramatic. A week has passed since Harold's funeral. My son had come over to help, but I ended up doing the majority of the cleaning because the house had been too quiet. "It's weird to be here now," he had remarked while holding a coffee mug in the living room, as if the house is unsure about how to handle itself. I had remained silent. On the inside, though, I had questioned what that made me. He proposed to sell it the following day. "You can't handle it," he said. "You don't require this much room." However, he had used "you" in the same way that someone uses "it." I had begun to stray from the story he was creating at that point, a tale of my gradual decline, my presence turning into a courtesy, and my memories becoming burdens he didn't ask to bear. So I carried them by myself. I was now deciding what to do with them. They should learn in time, in my opinion. Although there was a brief, businesslike pause on the other end, I could tell she understood. A language is spoken by women like ourselves. It is reflected in the things we choose not to say. I took out my address book later, went over the names. Many of the people I had intended to call, write, or reconnect with were circled in pencil. The name of my son made me stop. For family, it was still listed under FI, considered moving it toward the rear, to the edge. Perhaps taking it out completely. I traced my finger over the ink instead. I put the book away, placed it on the shelf. The past didn't need to be edited, just the future. Furthermore, the future has already been prepared, filed, and notarized. I gave the plant some water the following morning. He got me a fiddle-leaf fig 2 birthdays ago, but he couldn't remember its name, so I repotted it. Let it do the talking. Nothing was mailed by me. I didn't give him a call. Just as I had learned of the wedding, I knew he would discover it on his own time. Used, not invited, nameless. That evening, I prepared soup. He used to request thyme and lentils when he was ill. I only served 1 bowl, although I made plenty for 2. I allowed the remainder to cool on the counter. I then silently poured it into the compost bin. Sometimes, even when no one is around, you prepare something out of habit. I shut off the kitchen's lights and waited for the darkness to descend outside the window. It was strangely reassuring, because the house finally reflected the true state of affairs. When I went, I left the lights off. He didn't say a word during the entire wedding. No check-in. I didn't say thank you for lending Claire's daughter the cake stand. It was put online by Claire's niece in a public setting with a glossy appearance, soft backgrounds and filters. I didn't look. I was browsing a recipe website looking for an old apple tart I used to make every fall when I noticed a familiar last name flashing on the sidebar. Highlights of the Avery wedding. An unforgettable garden party. They were there, arranged as if they were magazine portrait family. The just-arrived in-laws, the parents of the groom. My son was there, standing next to Tanya's mother, his hand on her back, as though she had always been there, as though she had prepared his first lunch, nursed him through fevers, and reassured him that even boys could weep if they needed to. His name was missing. How it wouldn't mention punishment or love, just the facts, just a decision. And perhaps at that point he would understand. He never wrote anything out of rage. Silently, he was written out. Since silence can also serve as a border, I shut the door, I locked it. He placed his letter in the drawer behind the silverware, beside the bottle opener and the keys that were no longer useful. I mailed the final documents on a clear morning. It was a calm day with no wind or haste, and everything seemed measured. I tucked the envelope between a folded grocery list and an extra pair of gloves in my handbag and proceeded to the post office. The clerk didn't inquire. Without much fuss, he simply weighed it, stamped it, and put it away. That was the end of it. Avoid conflict. Not with doors slammed or shouts yelled. I was fed up with being a footnote in my own narrative. I typed a fresh letter early the next morning. Not to him, to the executor. Just a little update, an updated trust amendment. I simply wrote 1 paragraph on the heirlooms. My family had owned the ring, bracelet, and antique clock for 3 generations. There will be no implicit or presumed entitlement by blood or marriage. All sentimental assets will only pass to beneficiaries identified in writing. When I die away, anything without name tags will be deemed mine and nobody else's. The sentence was odd, but it gave me a sense of completeness. It was printed by me. I folded it once. I put it in the envelope that I had left open some weeks prior, then put a lid on it. Only one envelope. Put it in the drawer with the linens. Not sent by mail, not quite yet. However, it was prepared. I was too. I set 3 items across the table. The sealed envelope, the completed addendum, and a smaller box containing the jewellery I hadn't worn in years. Mum gave me the locket. When my granddaughter still addressed me by name rather than Dad's mum, I promised her the charm bracelet. Together they would go, not in fragments, as a single action, one last motion. There was one inheritance that was honest. I took the notebook I used to write in when my thoughts were too racing to fall asleep from the drawer next to the bed that night. I carefully typed after opening a blank page. I was here all the time, at each table, each and every call, all the calm times when no one was around. You excluded me from the wedding. However, I drafted the will, and I can still recall every detail. It wasn't signed by me. I didn't have to. Like a never-mailed letter, I slipped the page between the pages of the amended will. I then placed a candle on the windowsill and lit it. I saw it flash. Don't blow out the wax. Instead, allow it to pool and solidify. Slowly but surely, it burned down on its own. I also kept it from them, not quite yet. A forwarded email was the first indication. She had said too little and smiled too much. She was courteous in the manner of a visitor who was already planning their redecoration. She offered to dry after supper as I washed the dishes. When I gave her a plate, she said, "This kitchen has charm." Then I realized it wouldn't last. Not the marriage. That would likely continue. Out of convenience, out of image. However, the mother-son tie between us had already started to weaken. He was learning another narrative with ease, one in which I was in the background. The home served as a platform. It was voluntary to make the recollections. I went to the attic that night. It had been years since I had been up there, not since Harold's death. When I pulled the cord, the light flickered. Time and cedar scents filled the air. I discovered the antique chest with the authentic, unaltered family albums, and underneath the picture was the caption, "The lovely couple has the admiration of all 4 parents." Each of the 4. 3 times I read the words again. Then, as if it had burned me, I closed the laptop and shoved it across the table by an inch. The image wasn't the painful part. The rewriting was the problem. Erasure. How easily I had been replaced and cut out. I brewed tea again, as I always do. But this time, I didn't touch the mug on the counter. I observed the steam float away, the swirl dissolving as fast as it appeared. I recalled the moment he brought her home for the first time. Not a casual, "Hope you've been well" message, sent at 2 a.m, when the weight of guilt is greatest. Nothing was present. I therefore tidied the spare bedroom. Not because there was a visitor. It had been months since anyone had. However, there were still remnants of them in the room, including pictures on the wall, a sweater hanging on the back of the rocker, and a light pink hairbrush that I had purchased for my granddaughter when she was 12. Just in case she ever stayed the night again, I used to keep it there. She didn't. When I opened the ancient bureau's drawer, it creaked. There was a burgundy, plush, string-tied velvet pouch inside. Before I opened it, I knew what was inside. The wristband. My grandmother's. Genuine gold, heavy. Initials and a delicate pattern of oak leaves are etched on it. Claimed that it appeared strong, as if it had been inherited from queens. If it would be his one day, he had inquired. "Yes," I replied, "if you're the type of man who respects the women who wore it before you." The plan had been that I had quietly kept it for him for years, the hospital wristband from the day of his birth, school plays and birthdays. I didn't know what else to call them, so I opened the album titled The Middle Years. Photos of our first puppy, my son's toothless smile and myself in the background, holding a book, arranging a table, or smiling at something just out of frame, were all there. I went over one page with my hand. A birthday celebration at the age of 8. We had constructed a fortress out of cardboard. I was up until 2 in the morning, the drawbridges being painted. It was the happiest day of his life, he told me. No picture of the time, only recollection. I carefully closed the book, grabbed a marker. I wrote the following in soft pen, on the photo sleeve's edge. Here, it is still remembered. I then put the album in a fresh package. I labelled it with my name instead of his. Your granddaughter looks stunning. I paused. Then I made a click. Grainy and bathed by fairy lights, the film showed laughter that flowed like music. My kid was there, delivering his speech. I saw him raise his glass and grin as he expressed his pride in the woman his daughter had grown into. He expressed his gratitude to everyone who made this day possible. Everyone. Like a stone, the word fell. He enumerated names. The friends who had travelled in from 3 states away, Tanya's parents and their siblings. He thanked each one individually. They did not include my name. It wasn't a mistake. It was a decision. I ended the video, not out of rage, just ... firmly. I looked around the room, put the phone down and folded my hands in my lap. It was now late dark and the light had changed, silently, as if you were stepping barefoot on something jagged that you hadn't noticed in the rug. I stayed by the window for a while after she went, watching the wind sweep the cherry tree's small petals across the porch steps. There was a sense of foreshadowing. There is usually a mess after a celebration. I pictured the silver cutlery catching the last of the sun, the tables covered in greenery, and fairy lights above. As the remarks started, I pictured people lifting their glasses, clattering forks against plates and laughing uncontrollably, and I saw a single seat that was unoccupied. Of course, not literally. They would have done a thorough count. No mistakes or unintentional placeholders would occur. However, the disparity would be in the emotional realm. The woman who taught her how to thread a needle is not mentioned. I gave the receiver a smile. Then, I'm relieved that they have already been documented. I heard him take a breath, a slow, lingering breath that never returned. After a few minutes, we hung up. Courteous, punctuated with tenderness that has been practiced. However, the actual discussion had already taken place, in the silence. I put the sealed copy of the will in the safe that evening, adjacent to the bracelet, beside the locket, beside the letter. 3 little truths, waiting, carefully packed. I also slept through the night, for the first time in a long time. I was reminded of it by the garden. Hands buried in soggy dirt, I was pulling weeds along the lavender bed's back edge, when I came across the small marker stone that Harold had planted when he planted the cherry tree. It was a plain object, bearing his initials and the year. I had overlooked its presence. Like other silent pledges, it was buried under time and neglect. I washed my hands, sat back on my heels and gazed at it. It had remained, not because it was valuable. I put the sealed trust documents and the bracelet inside the safe, along with the envelope containing his note. There are instances when things belong next to each other, not because they are resolved, but rather because they are complete. I made banana bread that night. Claire stopped by for tea. We didn't discuss the letter, I believe she was aware. Rather, we discussed how the neighbour's dog had figured out how to open their gate and how the crocuses were pushing through the ground. I showed her the small, bowl-shaped pale green ceramic planter I had recently purchased. "It's beautiful," she remarked. "What are you going to put in it?" I took a while to respond. I then remarked, "Perhaps nothing. Not all things require filling." She grinned. She got it. I opened the rear door after she had gone. I allowed the chilly air to cool my sleeves while I stood on the porch in the twilight. One day I thought I saw him, reading the will. Its serene clarity, ever kind and protective, Claire sent it along with a short note. "Before he asked you directly, I thought you would want to see this. It was a thread between my son and a real estate agent that was forwarded. Bold typeface made phrases like, "Once the estate clears" and "when we're ready to transition the property" stand out. I wasn't specifically mentioned, just my mother's house and "we'll update it so it can be sold." We. Change. They're selling. The remarks had a surgical feel to them. I read it twice while lounging in the armchair by the fireplace, then a third time. It wasn't about the specifics. It was their underlying presumption that I was only here temporarily. That an erasable pencil was used to write my name. That a line item on a speculative listing might sum up my life. It had been months since he had called. Not since the nuptials. However, inheritance was now being discussed. He hadn't even inquired about my well-being. She taught her how to make authentic hot cocoa, not the powdered kind, and prepared cinnamon bread every winter. Because a little beauty never hurt a serious thing, the woman who had once signed her college recommendation letter with a ribbon around it was not acknowledged. It wasn't until I observed my teacup rattling a little in its saucer that I realized I was trembling. After putting it down, I went to the den. He requested me to sort the photo albums, so I opened them. I had forgotten how heavy they were. The first few were very straightforward: holidays, birthdays, and untidy baby pictures. However, the pictures altered in the middle of the third album. Less pictures of me, more about his spouse. Then only the kids after. I had been edited out somewhere. Absence rather than black ink or scissors. I was there for entire years, but it wasn't documented. And had spent a few years colouring my son's scissors under table. Someone sent a holiday text, who made a soft knock and departed in silence, who always offered something kind without ever asking for anything. Additionally, the foundation was a tiny educational trust for females interested in studying music or art. The kind of legacy that may alter someone's future, yet wouldn't appear in photo albums. Inside the folder, I put the card. I ended up standing by the piano that evening. Years had passed since it was played. Nevertheless, I opened the lid, hit a single key, center C. It was a clean note, modest. Additionally, it served as a reminder that I was still present. Decisions are still being made, still influencing the subsequent events. And when I spotted my son's big, hand-addressed envelope on the porch the following morning, maybe containing an apology or an explanation, I chose not to open it. I left it there after that in the middle of the table. My phone rang after 2 days. His voice was heard, kind, comfortable, and wary. "Hello, Mom." I took a while to respond. "So, listen," he added. "Tanya and I wanted to know if you've thought about what comes next. Any further? I mean, with the house." He wasn't inquiring. He was in a circle. "I have," I muttered. A pause. "Oh, all right. Well, I was thinking that perhaps it could remain in the family when the time comes. Ava said she would like to raise her children in a house like this. That would be something, wouldn't it?" I remained silent. He made another attempt. "I simply want to ensure that your desires are respected." I hadn't heard anything from him that sounded like affection in a year, and I took it inside. Place it on the counter and, like a paperweight over a story I no longer wanted to finish, set a teacup on top of it. For 2 days, the envelope remained on the counter. With a silent ache in one hand and a steaming cup of tea in the other, I passed it every morning. Like the broken teapot, the unopened books on the shelf, and the spot where the wallpaper peeled, but I was never quite disturbed enough to fix. It had become just another item in the house. I refrained from opening it. What it said didn't frighten me. I feared what it wouldn't do. I eventually managed to slide my finger beneath the flap and extract the letter on the 3rd day. No salutations. Simply, "I am aware of your distress. No, I apologize. I don't comprehend. Not even Mum." My name was never utilized by him. He never disclosed his actions. The letter had a ledger-like format, a neat list of complaints disguised as miscommunications. We didn't intend to leave you out. If you wanted to be involved in the planning, you could have said something. We thought you were content to keep to yourself these days. Presumed. Once more that word. His favourite way to get my consent was to presume that I didn't need to be invited, didn't want to come, and didn't care about the ceremony, the pictures, or the table with 4 chairs, and none for me, as if the phrase still had meaning. He wrote that the house should stay in the family. And one last sentence at the end. Let's avoid making this a long-term conflict. You remain significant to us. After carefully folding the letter, I put it back in the envelope. Next, I unlocked the safe, took out the revised will, a sticky note with the date of today, and the word final was added. Not a drama. No second draft, just a strong, silent determination. I made tea that night by boiling water and, doing something I hadn't done since he was a teenager, I entered his former room and simply stood there. I hadn't made many changes. There were still some dusty books on the shelf, a glove for baseball, an ancient scientific fair award for second place. I used to dust it once a week. It was leaning slightly to one side now. He had a dent on the desk from pressing his pencil too hard while performing algebra one evening. When I missed him, I would rub my thumb over it. Now I did that. However, I was no longer missing him. Not at all. The person he was before he learned to communicate in absences was what I missed. Descending again, I opened the filing cabinet, removed the completed draft of the will, examined each clause, each and every signature. Each page has been dated and initialed. Everything was there. Unchangeable. I produced a duplicate. I folded it. My lawyer's return address was on the flap of the cream-coloured envelope I slipped it into. None of it was requested by them, not for years. Furthermore, they hadn't merited it. Not because they did not make a call, not even because I wasn't thanked by them. However, they rewrote our history in a way that was so informal that it sounded almost unintentional, until it wasn't. At each family milestone, they agreed to have my name erased and anticipated inheriting the life I created. As though love could be transferred, as if entitlement was a given because of blood. The note card was soft in my fingers as I stood there, and I tore it gently down the centre. But then again. Next, into quarters. I calmly, without fanfare, tossed the fragments in the garbage. I pulled out a new card later, wrote just 2 names, Claire. The base. That was sufficient. Claire, who provided soup during my illness. It had stayed in its original location through storms, pruning seasons, and cold. It didn't matter if everything was passed on. Some things were sufficient just because they persisted. I made a mental list of the things that would eventually be left behind as I strolled through the house later that day. The little things too, not simply the large ones, like the house, money, and heirlooms. When I made birthday cakes, I always used the butter yellow mixing bowl, the blue quilt that was repaired after being chewed by the dog, the vintage sewing needle tin. I had been keeping a note card list of who would get what for years. Ava, mixing bowl, blue quilt, Max, books, chess set made of wood, Jonathan. Harold liked the patio furniture and his record player. As I stood in the hallway holding that card, I came to the realization that I had not previously allowed myself to acknowledge. I brought a bundt cake and he requested me to look through and sort a box of old photo albums, as we don't really have room anymore. They were sorted by me, silently, by themselves. That box remained unopened under the window seat in the den. Using a yellow post-it note that said, "Came to me by mistake," I left the misdelivered invitation on Claire's porch the following morning. Evelyn, I already had it, and I didn't want to hold it any longer. However, the knowledge remained unchanged in its absence. No one invited me. I couldn't find a seat at the table. I didn't pin a corsage to my blouse. The programme makes no mention of it. There was no mention of a picture queue or a trip down the aisle. Without a word, my son had written me out. I refrained from crying. I prepared tea. When pain has no listeners, this is what you do. I cut the edges off, The leaves were cleaned, placed it in a brand new ceramic pot that I purchased for myself. I used a chalk pencil to write 3 words on the pot's base. This place is still expanding. I then let the light in by opening the windows. I didn't look at my cell. I didn't question if he would call at last. I just put the sweater, a few novels she never returned to read, and the old pink brush in a donation bag, and refolded the duvet on the guest bed, not with resentment. However, I now require the drawer for another use, an updated version of the will, snuggled between crisp sheets. I didn't mail it, not quite yet. I was found by a picture, not the other way around. The envelope was as thick as cardboard, cream with a hint of shine, and sealed with an unfamiliar wax symbol. I wasn't the intended recipient. The letter was sent to Mr. and Mrs. Jonathan Avery, who look after Claire's daughter. Not my relatives, but my neighbours. It was misdelivered by the mailman. It was exquisite and unduly weighty, and I knew it as soon as I touched the paper. When you want to be seen rather than remembered, you send out this type of invitation. I was ready to walk it over when I noticed the return address, which was the garden courtyard at Willow and Birch, Event Hall and Conservatory, in a tiny embossed gold print. I was able to avoid opening it. I was aware beforehand. It was my granddaughter's wedding, the only daughter of my son. Neither my son nor I received an invitation. With the envelope still in my hands, as though its weight may change if I held it for too long, I sat down at the kitchen table. I then pulled out a blank envelope from the drawer next to it. No address, no label for returns. Just an empty place that I could fill when I felt ready. I skipped meals that evening. After making chamomile tea, I sat in the living room with the lights turned down and listened to the music of a neighbour wafting through the walls. A warm and gritty jazz record. I thought of the wedding band practicing. White lace skimmed the floor as I pictured her heading down the aisle, and I pictured my delighted son standing next to her. Sure, I felt positive that I was no longer needed. I was positive that I wouldn't take any action. I refrained from crying. This time, however, I left the folder open on the desk. Open, facing the seat he had occupied. I kept it from them. Not quite yet. The first thing I noticed was the silence on the Monday following the wedding. It didn't. It continued to be as uninterested as the individuals who had sealed it. No error occurred. No names were forgotten. No mistake. It was intentional. My granddaughter gave me a firm embrace the last time I saw her. A year ago, that was. "You'll be there when I find the dress, right?" she asked. "Of course," I replied. I had always been there, whether it was for her first piano recital, school plays, or shattered hearts. She wanted something old that still glittered, so I recall sewing pearls to the hem of her graduation gown. The calls slowed after that. Then they came to a halt, and now there was an invitation to a wedding that I had only heard about in passing during my holiday visit to my son. Through third-party rumours and overheard phone conversation and rumours of caterers and florists behind closed doors, it had been a tense visit, courteous, meticulously planned. The sun shone through the kitchen window, illuminating the dust particles like golden confetti as the kettle steamed. I observed them floating. Their aimlessness had a certain tranquility about it. We anticipated nothing. There was nothing to hide. I opened the drawer in the hallway later that week. The drawer held the papers I hadn't touched since Harold's passing. It had been 7 years since I last updated the will. My son had been calling me consistently on Sundays, and my granddaughters were enrolled in middle school. I looked throughout the folder. I located the beneficiaries section. His name remained, his spouse's. I meticulously recorded the numbers of each grandchild. I wrote it all by hand. All I could hear was the slow tick of the hallway clock and the hum of the refrigerator. I remembered the RSVP card I never got. And on the desk behind me, the will is still open. And under the fairy lights she would hang above the dance floor. I would never hear my name being called. Then I got to my feet, walked over to the desk. The folder was closed, not indefinitely, only for the time being, since I would have the option, and they were unaware of that at the time. My neighbour's daughter stopped by to borrow a cake stand the week before the wedding. Bright-eyed, flushed, and wearing a floral frock that was too flimsy for the weather, she stood on my porch. "We simply don't have enough servers for all the desserts, and Mum said you have those pretty glass ones with the silver base," she remarked, apologising for the interruption. Yes, I told her. That made it feel more human. Now, though, it felt like a letter's signature was unanswered now. Nothing changed on my end. Not quite yet. However, I did not close the folder on the desk. Not as a danger. Not even as a declaration. "I would like to remind you that I had yet to divulge certain details, not for petty reasons, not in my memories. After all I had left of them was recollection. I made a cake that night. The favourite of my granddaughters is chocolate almond. After allowing it to cool, I cut a portion and put the remainder in the freezer. Even when the world no longer demands it, old habits continue to exist in the body. I ate by myself in the same chair I had usually used at the dining table. A candle wasn't lit by me. I didn't play any tunes. No call of gratitude. No pictures were shared. Not even a courteous message with a wish you could have been there and a filtered group photo. The world had changed. They had too. I was expecting a nod, something modest but not a big gesture. A memento that read, "We thought of you." A cake slice wrapped in foil. An extra place card. Inconspicuously, a favour bag was placed inside the mailbox. Nothing was present. That morning, I vacuumed the living room. It was more of a habit than a need. The house was always clean. Harold used to make fun of me for that. Claimed that, as if straight lines in the carpet might prevent life from going awry, I cleaned when I felt nervous. However, I vacuumed carefully that morning, consciously. Fortunately, my thoughts were muted by the machine's whir. I turned it off, and the ensuing silence was more deafening than the sound. After that, I stood in the hallway for a long time staring at the framed picture of our 7-year-old kid. With his hands sticky from frosting and his front teeth missing, I cooked for 16 people, hosted everyone, and cleaned the floor until the grout was spotless throughout that Christmas. Not even a picture. There is just a group photo with the generic label, Holiday Happiness 2014, with no description beneath a happy face that reads, "At Mum's house." He replied, "Next year, let's do something simpler. Maybe Tanya's parents can host." When I recalled the evening I cooked 4 pies, the next year they had, and each subsequent year. The change wasn't sudden, it was subtly done, slowly. Similar to how seasons change, they do so gradually over a number of little days before you wake up and discover that all the leaves have fallen. My hands had a subtle scent of lemon oil and dust by the time I closed the last album. I got up and made my way back to the desk. The folder was opened. I took up a pen this time. I didn't omit his name. Not quite yet. I have attached a sticky note to the will's top. "Review beneficiaries." The neatest handwriting I can manage. I carefully put the pen back in its slot. I closed the folder again. I thought back to the day we took it. I had made him another cake just to cheer him up after he had sobbed over a broken balloon. I also grinned at the time, a faint, worn-out smile. I then flipped the frame so that it was facing down. I wasn't upset. I wasn't even feeling very depressed anymore. I had simply had enough of acting as though love had to be one-sided. I later purchased a little box of note cards from the corner store. Cream-coloured, heavyweight, the type used for funerals and weddings. The kind folks never purchase anything for themselves. I took them home and placed one next to the desk folder. My phone buzzed with a message that night. It came from a distant cousin who was kind but not close. She forwarded me a video from the reception that someone had uploaded. "I thought you would find this interesting." Everything was amber-washed. There used to be a lovely silence in the house while I folded laundry on the couch and Harold read the newspaper. It was that time of day when memories suddenly surface. I returned to the desk. I opened the folder once more, took the sticky note off. I took up the pen and made actual modifications this time. Not furiously crossed out, nor torn nor scrawled. Only names, carefully taken out. I revised the list of beneficiaries, retained Claire's name. I added a scholarship fund for the quiet girls from the nearby high school which I had long considered establishing, the ones nobody saw blossom. Additionally, I left nothing in the spot where my son's name had been. No substitute, just not there. Naturally, every time I said yes. I was well known for that. We talked casually about the wedding as she followed me into the kitchen. Have you heard that the reception is now being held outside? As I reached inside the cabinet above the oven, she continued, the weather is supposed to hold. They had those long tables with the rustic wood, you know, just one big family, as they say, without a head table. With firm hands, I gave her the stand. It sounds beautiful, she grinned. It will be exquisite. The Avery family is an amazing host, I must say. Once more, that word, family. It was not intended to sever, however, it did.